As Pat mentioned, this was done in a random draw, and randomly we ended up in alphabetical order, which is going to make my job a little easier. So thank you all candidates for being here. You've met our panel of questioners here who will be asking many of the questions during this debate. Each of the candidates has received the rules in advance. Just a reminder, 2-minute answer for the opening statement and the closing statement. Each answer to each question will be 90 seconds. The most important person in the room probably today is our timekeeper, Gina Padron. Gina, you want to stand up and wave to everybody? She's got the hardest job, perhaps. She's going to be holding signs up that the candidates can see. Candidates, that's exactly where she'll be located, so look to her as she holds those signs up. Again, 90 seconds for each of your questions, or answers to the questions. With that, we do want to go ahead and get started with our opening statements. Let me again reiterate, though, that the applause factor. It is important. If the emphasis is going to have loud applause, so much so that we can ruin the audio system, which we did during the 2009 gubernatorial debate at Roanoke College. There was some really good applause there, but if during this debate we can limit it, that will make sure we get as many questions in as we possibly can. The opening statement, our first one will be from Senator George Allen. Senator Allen.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome all of y'all to the Star City. And like most parents, Susan and I look at the future through the eyes of our children. And we're hearing from so many Virginians who are concerned that too many young people are graduating from college but unable to find jobs and loaded with debt, some of their own and also debt from Washington. As parents, all of us want to be working to make sure that future generations have actually better opportunities to achieve the American dream than what we had growing up. In fact, that's why I've gotten off the sidelines and into the fight in this crucial Senate race. I envision a much better future for our country. And this election coming up in 6 months is going to determine the trajectory of our country, whether we're going to continue declining or to begin ascending again. I believe it's time for America's comeback. And it's a comeback that's based on the foundational principles of freedom, personal responsibility, and opportunity for all. A comeback that is reinvigorating our entrepreneurial spirit in our country with the pro-growth policies, with more simple, fair, and competitive taxes, reasonable regulations, productive energy development, and empowering educational opportunities that'll send a message to the world that America is open for business again. We also need a comeback that gives Americans a smaller, fiscally responsible government that's focused on its core constitutional responsibilities of national defense and national security, and as far as possible, leave Americans free to chart their own courses for our families, for our businesses, for our communities, and in our states. In 1980, Ronald Reagan defeated President Carter in an election that changed the course of America, and it changed the course of the world. This election will be just as important. 2012 is our generation's rendezvous with destiny. It's our time for choosing, and freedom hangs in the balance.
Senator Allen, thank you. Let's go now to our next candidate, Pastor E.W. Jackson.
My name is E.W. Jackson. I'm a candidate for United States Senate. For those of you who haven't met me before, I am not an African American. I am an American. And I am running because I believe for the last 3.5 years, we have been pitted against one another. Our economy has been decimated. Our Judeo-Christian values have been denigrated. Our treasury has been raided. Everything that we hold dear seems to be under attack. And we have now come to a point in our history where something has to be done. There is no more time. Time has run out. And yet we are told, in spite of the fact that we have sacrificed so much for so many in our country and in the world, that we must apologize to the world. Well, we are here in Southwest Virginia to make an announcement to our fellow citizens and to the world at large. Apologizing is over. The sun is now rising in America again, and it will shine brighter than it ever has shone before. And we are going to come together and rebuild this nation and restore the values that we hold dear. And we are going to say to the world, America is the greatest nation that the world has ever known. And we're going to work together to fulfill the vision of one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we are going to put a new occupant in the White House. and we're going to take over the United States Senate, and we're going to make sure that America remains the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Thank you, sir. Let's move to our next candidate, that is Delegate Bob Marshall.
Hi, I'm Bob Marshall, and a Bob Marshall win on June 12th means a big headache for Tim Kaine on June 13th. I'm a 21-year member of the Virginia General Assembly. I have never voted for a tax increase. I have never voted for deficit spending. I can stand on my record. I do not have to run from it. I worked 6 years as a congressional aide. I devised the Hyde Amendment, cutting off all funding of abortion. I developed parliamentary know-how to put Tip O'Neill in knots and headaches. I have already beaten Tim Kaine in a number of public policy issues. For example, in 2007, I sued Tim Kaine, I was the only state legislator to do this, for passing a law that set up unelected taxing authorities in Northern Virginia and Tidewater. Had I not sued, Tim Kaine would have illegally collected $1.75 billion unconstitutional taxes. I sued in the Circuit Court of Arlington. The Virginia Supreme Court said 7-0, all 14 taxes must go down. Taxation without representation is still illegal in Virginia because I sued. This goes back to Magna Carta, when the medieval knights held King John at sword point. They obviously had different lobbying laws at that time. And they got him to agree to this principle. This principle still works now. We still have to pay attention to this. In 2009, watching Washington's overreach, I devised the Healthcare Freedom Act. I put this in. It was House Bill 10. It gave Attorney General Cuccinelli the standing to sue on the crux of that law, the individual mandate. I could not find one court case in 1789 which authorized so much as Congress compelling anybody to buy even a candle. Only serfs must sign contracts. Citizens cannot be compelled to sign contracts. In 2006, I authored the marriage amendment. Actually, I devised it in 2003. It won with 153,000 more votes than Jim Webb. I can win. I've already beat Tim Kaine. Barack Obama won my district with 57%. I win there. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. And our last candidate is Jamie Radtke.
I want to thank Pat Mullins, the chairman of the Republican Party of Virginia, for hosting this debate. You know, I got into this race because I saw that out-of-control spending and a crippling debt were an immediate threat to my family and your family. Let me get straight to the point of this election. If we do not deal with spending, nothing else matters. There are a lot of issues we care very much about: education, transportation, energy. But if we do not deal with spending and start paying down an almost $16 trillion debt, then jobs and our economy will be devastated, including the safety net for seniors and the disadvantaged. Now, we got into this mess because of the fiscal irresponsibility of career politicians in both parties who say that they're for a balanced budget amendment, but then turn and vote for trillions in new spending. I have offered bold, concrete solutions that would actually get us to a balanced budget in 5 years. Look, politicians have been talking in circles for decades, but they're the ones that have gotten us deeper in debt. Virginians are demanding no more blank checks for Congress, no more political cronyism, and no more half measures that do nothing to solve our fiscal crisis. I want to secure the future and the present for your family and for mine. We cannot afford to run another undisciplined campaign that gives this seat to the Democrats. We must have a candidate that can provide a clear contrast in this race, run an energetic campaign, and can demonstrate that our party, at this crucial time in history, is ready to govern responsibly. I am that candidate. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. And I do want to point out that this is also being streamed on WSLS.com, so welcome to all of our viewers that may be watching on the internet across the entire Commonwealth today, reaching a larger audience hopefully as well. I'm going to ask the first question. Senator Allen, we'll begin with you. We'll go down the row. By the way, we will then start alternating as we go throughout the debate with who begins in the answering of our questions. First question is dealing with debt, since all of you mentioned that in some capacity or another in your opening statements there. The debt limit has been increased in the United States well over 75 times since 1960, with requests for those increases coming from Republican and Democratic presidents alike. Ronald Reagan signed 17 increases. President Obama has already signed 3 just in his first term. As a senator, Senator Allen, you voted 4 times to increase the debt limit. And experts say that we are now likely to see another request to increase the debt limit probably by January as our new senator is sworn into office. That request could even be coming from a President Romney. If elected, will you vote to increase the debt limit if that request is made? And if not, how will you ensure that we meet our obligations and do not default on our debt? Senator Allen?
The situation, you talked about the 18 debt ceiling increases during Ronald Reagan's time and through the years. And those are those days, and now is different. The amount of debt that has increased in just the last 3 years with this administration has just exponentially increased. And it's not just Republicans saying this. The creditworthiness of America for the first time in all history has been downgraded. The annual deficits are now over $1 trillion every single year. When I left the U.S. Senate, the annual deficit was about $160 billion. Now, you just can't continue this way. The most recent effort was to have a real spending caps, which I think is important because you just can't continue at this rate. Number one, I think there should be a balanced budget requirement in the Constitution of the United States. We have it here in Virginia. 49 states have it. I think line item veto authority ought to be given to the president. I used it 17 times as governor. The line item veto, people say, well, what does that matter? When I was in the Senate, I was one of about a dozen who voted against that bridge to nowhere. And if you had line item veto authority, it would stop it. So I can't see any increases in debt limits unless there are concrete steps with concrete ironclad spending restraints, because we're loading future generations with such dangerous levels of debt.
All right, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you. I pledge not to vote for an increase in the debt ceiling under any circumstances other than a national security emergency. Now you ask, how would we go about avoiding a default on our obligations? We've got to cut spending, and we've got to do it dramatically. Jim DeMint, Rand Paul, and some others, Mike Lee, have joined together with a budget that balances in 5 years. They've suggested we need to get rid of the Department of Education, and I agree with them. We need to get rid of the EPA. We need to get rid of the Department of Commerce, get rid of energy. We need to go on an axe adventure with the budget. For those of you who have not seen my axe, I don't have it with me here today, but we need to really get serious about cutting. And you can't talk about freezing spending. It's never worked. You've got to cut the budget, and the cuts have got to be dramatic if we're going to not increase the debt ceiling and at the same time not default on our obligations.
Delegate Marshall.
I could see you mistaking me for the bishop if I had a beard. But in 2009, stimulus money came from Washington, D.C. When the budget first passed the House of Delegates, I voted yes. When it came back from conference with stimulus money in it, I voted no. Tim Kaine supported that. I've already juxtaposed myself to him. I don't have to worry about that. I can criticize him for voting for stimulus. In 2010, when the budget came back again from conference, Republican leaders undercut the Virginia retirement system, which is our version of Social Security for state employees, by $620 million. Again, I voted no. My experience shows you I don't mind facing my own caucus. I don't mind facing the others because my oath of office is first to you. Now, on this question of a line item veto, in fact, we could do it now without a constitutional amendment. Why do I know that? Because when I worked in Congress for a conservative Democrat in 1970, the Democrats were mad that Richard Nixon wasn't spending all the money. What they did, they later passed the bill, Budget Impoundment and Control Act, requiring him to spend the money. The president can sequester funds and not spend everything, but the members of Congress don't want that to happen. Moreover, a balanced budget takes 3/4 of the states, 34 states, to ratify. You need 2/3 of Congress. I'll tell you, if I'm there, I'm going to take the revenues and the expenses, and I'm going to go back and pick an old Appropriations Act for HUD, for whatever agencies there are, and I'll get to getting rid of them later, and match them with that. We can match expenses to revenues right now. You don't have to wait for a constitutional amendment. It would take about 3 years of these kind of votes, and the American people could see who is serious about cutting debt.
Very good, and Ms. Radtke.
It's like I said in the opening, if we do not deal with spending, nothing else matters. For each of you that have children that are 5 or younger, or grandchildren that are 5 and younger, before those children are old enough to vote and have a say in the direction their country is headed, the entire budget will be consumed by interest on the debt and entitlements. That's it. Now, I'm the only candidate up here that has offered concrete solutions on how to balance the budget in 5 years. It's called My 2 cents. It freezes federal spending at current levels because I don't believe that the federal government should every year get a pay raise while the rest of us suffer. It then takes and cuts 2 cents off of every federal dollar spent, and you balance the budget in 5 years. I also think that we have to have a gut check about what programs belong in Washington. Things like the Department of Energy that has 17,000 employees and 100,000 federal contractors, and we are not energy independent. Department of Education. Education belongs with parents and the local government. But let me just say this on a line item veto. It's great to talk about a line item veto. We could have maybe gotten rid of the 52,000 earmarks that George Allen voted for. And a balanced budget amendment is great, but he campaigned on that 6 years ago when he ran and did not pass it until the very end when it was up for re-election, and yet voted to raise the debt ceiling 4 times and add $3 trillion to the debt. That's not what we need.
Our next question comes from Dave Suderline with the Roanoke County Republican Committee. Dave.
If you had been in the Senate, would you have voted for cloture for Justices Kagan and Sotomayor, and would you have ultimately voted for their confirmation?
And we'll begin now with Mr. Jackson.
No, absolutely not. I have several criteria for any justice, and they don't meet any of them. Number one, they've got to be dedicated to the Constitution as written within the 4 corners of the document, the intent of the Founding Fathers. Number 2, they have to be pro-life. Number 3, they have to have the intellectual ability to do that job. And number 4, they have to be willing to defend themselves. So no, I wouldn't have voted for any of them.
Delegate Marshall.
I question whether Justice Kagan should really be even in this Obamacare decision at all. Clearly, as Solicitor General, she was involved with the decisions for the preparation of this case. She should be out of there. No, I don't support that. Moreover, I agree with John Marshall, who said that the Congress can control what the court does through a regulation of the appellate jurisdiction. We should simply wipe it out when it comes to things like same-sex marriage and abortion. The court has shown itself to be completely incompetent. Now, if I were a senator, I would ask, first of all, I'd look at their experience. I'd ask them their understanding of Marbury versus Madison. I'd ask them about the supremacy clause of the Constitution. I've got about 2,000 books, a lot of this on judicial philosophy and readings. I've gone back and read the original historical documents. I would ask for their familiarity with this, because when my wife and I sat in the Court of Appeals in Richmond on the Obamacare case, 2 of the 3 Democrat judges, randomly chosen by a Democrat computer, decided that the state of Virginia cannot defend its citizens from the federal predators in Washington. They never read the Federalist Papers. I would give a Q&A test on the Federalist Papers. If they didn't pass it, I wouldn't vote for them. End of discussion.
Jamie Radtke.
No, I would not. Many of you have heard me say that this is a true gut check time for Americans about whether or not we believe in a constitutional republic or whether we want to take a speedboat to socialism. This is a true gut check time for us. Did the Founding Fathers have it right when they said few and defined powers should be in Washington? The remaining powers are reserved to the states and to you and me. That is the question, and we should be judging those people that we put into the Supreme Court or other parts of the courts according to that litmus test. The balance of power needs to go back to the states. That's where the balance of power needs to go. You know, it's a funny thing. Even Alexander Hamilton said that he did not believe that the emphasis, the final arbiter, should be the courts. It should be the states and be the people. Let me say this last thing. I have been aggressively fighting putting power back in the states. As chairwoman and co-founder of the Virginia Tea Party Federation, we were a critical component in passing the Health Care Freedom Act that says you cannot mandate health insurance in Virginia, and we passed that before Obama passed his legislation in Congress. I was also a strong advocate of the Firearm Freedom Act to challenge the General Welfare Clause and Commerce Clause to say that if we buy or make and sell guns in this Commonwealth, that the federal government cannot regulate the sale and purchase of those guns. Thank you.
And Senator Allen.
The answer is no. I voted against both those nominees. I have voted for nominees who I like. Justice Roberts, who's now the Chief Justice, and also Sam Alito. From here, a judge was nominated that put forward Glenn Conrad. Another good judge that we nominated is Henry Hudson, the one who struck down the Obamacare law. I like judges who will apply the law, not invent the law. I want judges that will uphold the Constitution, not put in political views of their own. I'd like to see judges, in the question, there's a lot of questions that I ask judges, and I'm not going to tell you what the questions are, because when asking judges questions, you don't want them to be prepared for the questions you'd ask. But there's one thing on both these justices that you've mentioned that gets to the Constitution, and what is their interpretation of the Second Amendment of the Constitution? Do they look at that as a communal right or an individual right? And looking at what those two justices said on the Second Amendment, to me is the natural right of self-defense that's embodied in the Second Amendment. And if you look at the Bill of Rights, the Bill of Rights were to protect our individual rights: freedom of religion, freedom of expression, private property, due process, equal protection. They look at it as a communal right. And to think that the Second Amendment is not for individual rights, to me, shows that they don't understand the Constitution, they don't understand the Bill of Rights, and most likely they're also not going to understand that the 10th Amendment still applies, and that is the rights and prerogatives of the states. And so on that issue, it's probably one of the many reasons why the NRA has endorsed me in our campaign. Thank you.
Our next question will come from Mickey Miller with the Virginia Federation of Republican Women. Mickey.
Thank you. This past week, it was announced that Social Security will end in 2033, 3 years previous to what had been announced before that. What steps and options will you explore to shore up the fund? And would you support raising the retirement age of those born in the 1960s and later?
And we'll begin with Delegate Marshall.
Can my wife answer this first? I guess not. When Social Security was devised back in the 1930s, the average lifespan was less for men and less for women. And the assumption was there that you'd have a significant number of workers supporting retirees. That has been broken down for a long time. We now have a situation where you've got less than 3 workers per 1 retiree. Legal abortion didn't make this any better either. I would look at slowly raising the age of the retirees over time. You have to do this because more people are living in retirement longer than originally anticipated. The compact between generations has got to be kept. You've got to look for something else for the younger people in the future, but an agreement made is an agreement that should be kept, and we should not violate this.
Jamie Radtke.
Thank you. Yes, I do support raising the age over time for those of us that are younger, but I also support the idea that we should have an option to save our retirement for ourselves. I would much rather trust myself with my retirement than certainly the federal government, who has spent it or stolen it from all of us. We have all lived with the fear, those of you that are older or getting ready to go on, have lived with the fear that you may not get your retirement. Why in the world would we want to pass this fear down to our children and to our grandchildren? I also think we can do things creative. We can incentivize people to work beyond the retirement age by saying, if you work beyond the retirement age, then you can keep your payroll taxes. The employer keeps his, you keep yours. You're working longer. We don't have people going on to Social Security drawing down on the trust fund. But the other thing we need is we need a candidate that's going to run in this election against Tim Kaine and is going to be honest with the American people that where we are to get out of it is going to be painful. And we need candidates that are willing to go out and support Paul Ryan and others that have come up with proposals to support and fix whether it's Social Security or Medicare. What we don't need are candidates that are running from the Republicans that are bold enough and have the courage to say, here's what we can do to solve entitlements so that our children have a future like we've had.
Senator Allen.
The questions on Social Security. And most recently, a report came out. And it said it was going to get out of money 3 years earlier. You know the reason why? Because the economy is doing poorly. What we need to do is get this economy going. I agree with you, restrain the federal government and restrain spending, which is taking funds out in a variety of ways. The other part of the equation is let's get this economy moving. Let's make sure that this is an economy where we have the right economic policies, where more people will have jobs. Now on the specific ideas, this will all get demagogued because Tim Kaine and all these folks who have supported all this increase in spending and this reckless debt and Obamacare and this stimulus spending, which did not create the jobs that were promised, all of them will demagogue this issue. And everything, in my view, on Social Security ought to be on the table. On the table should be raising the retirement age, not for anybody who's on Social Security now or will be anytime soon. That was your question. It's for those born after the 1960s. There's also ideas of income adjustment in it. And there's a variety of things that could be done. The one thing that I will not be for, and that is raising taxes, Social Security taxes. I will be opposed to that. All the others can be on the table because I do think we need to preserve Social Security for those who are currently on Social Security as well as future generations. And I do think it makes sense, and I have voted for allowing individuals to have additional options for their retirement security.
And our final answer to this question will come from Mr. Jackson.
My father worked 33 years in Sun Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in Chester, Pennsylvania. He retired with $158 a month from them, and he depended upon that and his Social Security. Social Security, for me, is a sacred covenant that we have made with ourselves and with the American people, and that's a covenant that must be honored. However, we've got to look at this more intelligently than we have and not be afraid of the critics who suggest we're trying to destroy it. I would never want to destroy Social Security. But if Chile can come up with a system of allowing people to invest their own money and build wealth over the course of their lives so that they have more for retirement, I think if Chile can handle it, I think the United States of America can handle it too. And they're doing it in Galveston, Texas as well. So we've got to look at ways to allow freedom, folks, because that's what this election year is all about. It is all about freedom. Are we going to be a more free people than we've been, or are we going to allow our freedom to be taken away? So yes, we should maintain Social Security, but let's give people freedom to make their own choices and build wealth for themselves, and I think our entire country will be better off as a result.
Our next question will come from Michael Kogar, who's with the College Republican Federation of Virginia. Michael.
The total student loan debt has eclipsed $1 trillion. The average student is graduating with a loan debt of around $23,000. The system as it stands right now clearly doesn't work. What changes would you make, or would you privatize the system?
And Jamie Radtke, we'll begin with you.
This is a great question. I had to pay my way through graduate school, and it wasn't easy between loans and having jobs and tutoring. Let me just say this. When you have the entire federal government running the loan program for colleges, I can promise you it will not work because the federal government is involved. Now here's the thing. When you have the federal government giving loans, it does artificially inflate prices and tuitions for schools. We've got to allow the market to work. This is one of my pet peeves because we as Republicans say that we're for free markets. We say we're for free enterprise, and then we like to pick winners and losers. We've got to stop that, whether it's in the college loan industry, whether it's in ethanol, whether it's in sugar subsidies, whatever it's in, car, healthcare. We've got to stop picking winners and losers and do what we say we believe as Republicans and let the free market work. Another perfect example has been Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. You explain to me why the federal government's involved in mortgage banking. They shouldn't be. We should let the business work. And yet we've had candidates and we've had politicians, including Republicans, including George Allen, who did not support the reform for Fannie and Freddie. We should not be in the business of being in loans.
Senator Allen.
Thank you, Sergeant, for your question. As a sergeant, I appreciate and salute your service to our country. One of the things I cared about in college tuition was when I was in the U.S. Senate, providing assistance, tuition assistance to those in the Guard and Reserves for the same sort of educational benefits as the active duty have. Now, why is education important? This is the way to look at it, is because education is individual empowerment. The best jobs will go to those who are the best prepared. Having a skilled, capable workforce helps recruit business and jobs to a state. Tuition is skyrocketing across our country. And as I said in my opening statement, too many young people, the majority of folks graduating from college these days, either are underemployed or unemployed. And another, underemployed means they're in a job that's not fully utilizing their education, their talent, and their skills. This is an area of a big difference between my record and that of Tim Kaine. As governor, we made a priority of freezing college tuition. That helped college students in Virginia, including at private colleges, with tuition assistance grants, helped their families by freezing tuition. What Tim Kaine did is he cut higher ed funding, and tuition increased in colleges by over 30%, which of course hurt families. Now, my view is what we need to do is rein in the increases in tuition. It's primarily going to come from the colleges and the states, not from the federal government. But I think we ought to come together as Republicans and Democrats to make sure higher education is affordable, and more importantly, when a student graduates, that there's a job waiting for him, as opposed to going back home.
Mr. Jackson?
Now, one of my colleagues has said that if we don't get spending under control, nothing else matters. Well, frankly, I beg to differ. I think if we don't come back to our Constitution, we're never going to get spending under control. I mean, think about this. What gives the federal government the right to be involved in the school loan business? I mean, where does the authority for that come from? Somebody point out the amendment to me. Well, we've got to come back to the Constitution and stop trying to be all things to all people. Now look, colleges will drive up costs as long as they know that the federal government will foot the bill one way or the other. That's the way it works. And for some of us who have gone through college and worked our way through, my wife and I worked. I worked all night as a security guard. I worked as an RCA TV sales contract person from 6 to 9 that left there, went to a job as a security guard, trying to work our way up, trying to make life better for ourselves. Folks, we've got to get our economy going again so that there are opportunities for these young people to work their way through school and not borrow their way through it.
And our final answer on this question coming from Delegate Marshall.
Well, I worked as a plumber, not the White House variety. As a mailman, as part-time jobs to get through college. I did that without loans, and my family helped. But we have to figure out what we do with the existing loans. Now that the federal government is in here, we have to figure out how to get out of this Gordian knot. It will not be easy. I do not like the conditions that Obamacare put on medical training, because they're going to coerce people into violating their conscience because of the conditions they will put on the medical profession choices and the actions that you will undertake. These are improper. Loans that are out there, if they're going to be made in the future, should be made on the private sector, and the loan should be to the family, not to the student, because when you're 18 and 19, you're not thinking of what the cost is down the road. If the parents were involved in the loan, there'd be a little more prudence in how this money is spent, because you're thinking, oh, I'll buy the dormitory room, I'll do this. If you want to get married later and have kids, this is going to impede your ability to do that. So shifting to the private sector over time, I think, is the way to go.
Our next question will come from Dave Suderlin.
Was creating the Department of Homeland Security a good idea?
Senator Allen?
I was in D.C. In Northern Virginia at the time of the 9/11 attacks. And a lot of the debt spending that was occasioned when I was in the U.S. Senate was because of Homeland Security and obviously the effect it had on our economy and the fact that we had men and women deployed overseas, primarily at that time in Iraq and some in Afghanistan. And while I know people talk about all this spending, and it is a concern, I don't think, even for those who are against the military action in Iraq, I don't think that they'd say, well, let's not make sure our troops have the best equipment and protection for them while they're trying to secure our liberty and our freedom. The Department of Homeland Security, I think, was necessary in that, in the briefings I heard, just days after 9/11, was they had all the information of all 19 hijackers. And I thought, why in the heck were these people allowed in our country if you knew all of this? Because the consulate didn't know what the Defense Intelligence knew, and what the CIA knew was not shared with the FBI. None of it was shared with local or state law enforcement, much less state and local for the federal. So the value of Homeland Security is to try to get all of the connections of all law enforcement, all intel, domestic and foreign, to make sure that we know what is happening, and make sure there's not visas given to people who aim to harm our country. So Homeland Security has been expensive, but I think it is a primary responsibility of the federal government, and it's needed in this global war on terror, where terrorists are still plotting to hit America and our allies.
Mr. Jackson.
Well, look, I don't have a problem with the Department of Homeland Security, but if we're going to have a Department of Homeland Security, let's call it a war on terror, and let's actually go out and get the terrorists, instead of playing around and calling it, something else, some sort of national emergency or engagement of some kind, coming up with some cute language to avoid what is politically incorrect but is necessary for the survival of our people. But let me tell you what I do have a problem with. I do have a problem with TSA and the groping that goes on in these airports on children and on women and on people like me who was pulled in because I had something on my hands that was supposed to be explosive. And so they pulled me in and gave me the intimate pat-down, if you know what I mean. And I also have a problem with the Patriot Act. There are problems with the Patriot Act. There are 10 titles to the Patriot Act. Title II actually gives the government the right to do roving wiretaps and follow you everywhere and listen to everything, and it can do that with American citizens. And Title V, with these national security letters, which I consider to be dangerous, it allows the government to actually write a letter that gives them complete access to all of your private behavior, and even if you find out, you are not allowed to even hire a lawyer or tell somebody that you are being investigated. That's got to be dealt with.
Delegate Marshall.
I actually thought the TSA program was an Obama jobs program for out of work urologists. I recently reread the 9/11 report because I was the author of House Bill 1160, which is an act that the governor agreed to, which says that no Virginia agencies, state police, National Guard, sheriffs, anybody will cooperate in the so-called preventive detention of American citizens without trial, without specific charges, without counsel, without facing recusal. And I did that because I am concerned that we are developing a police surveillance state as a reaction, I think an unjustified reaction to threats from terrorists. We have drones flying over the United States. We have searchers, as the bishop talked about here. When I reread the report, the problem with information sharing stemmed from a policy that Janet Reno started in 1995, where she did not want information to be shared between prosecutors in the Justice Department, FBI, national security, and information gleaned from any grand jury to be shared. I don't know that you needed a new department, but you needed new policies and new efforts to address this concern.
And Jamie Radtke.
So we have the CIA, the FBI, the State Department, and the Department of Defense, and the solution in Washington was, let's create another department. That's what's wrong with Washington, is the answer is always a larger bureaucracy versus fixing the problem where it is. I believe that we've got to be very careful about the infringement on our civil liberties. I am deeply concerned about the civil liberties, mine and my kids and your kids. It is unbelievable to me that the federal government can have roving wiretaps and warrantless searches, that they can cull your bank records and information. Now think about this in the Founders' Day. This would be equivalent to the British coming into your home and looking at your bank records and looking at how much money you have and seeing the commerce that's going on in your home. This has got to be stopped. It's not just that, though. It's the things like the groping that was talked about, whether it's with the 2-year-old or whether it's with the 85-year-old. It's about the farmer who can't sell milk and vegetables and meat to his local community because the federal government's going to come in and raid. It's about parents not being able to pack lunches for their kids because the federal government wants to tell them what to do. We have got to stop this. The best defense for Americans is the Second Amendment. That's the best defense.
Our next question will come from Vicki Miller.
Do you support the Defense of Marriage Act? And if so, what is the basis of its constitutionality?
And Mr. Jackson, you will go first.
Well, yes, I do support the Defense of Marriage Act. I think that our Constitution, it must be remembered, didn't simply give us rights. It acknowledged rights that our Creator gave us. I happen to believe that marriage is a sacred right, but that marriage should be defined as between a man and a woman. Now, the sad thing I find is that it's necessary to have a Defense of Marriage Act, because there was a time when nobody would have even wondered, well, do we need to define it so that anything that somebody wants to call a marriage, they can do so? No, I think that we've got to protect marriage because the family is the most basic institution of our culture. Now, folks, I come from a background, I come from a broken home. I was raised in a foster home for half my life. A lot of the young people that I grew up with ended up in jail, on drugs. A lot of the young people that I minister to are in similar kinds of situations. The family is the best institution for raising children, and government will never be able to replace it. And we've got to do everything we can to protect the sanctity of the family so that these children can be raised up and become the kind of citizens that will take us into the next century.
Delegate Marshall.
Apparently, the Obama administration doesn't recognize that portion of the Constitution which allows Congress to regulate recognition of the public acts of the several states between the states because they don't recognize that states exist. Congress can control the interstate recognition of such things, and that's the specific authority for the Defense of Marriage Act. And for any judge to pretend otherwise, they should get an F in constitutional law. I would consider impeaching such individuals. As a matter of fact, when I was in the House of Delegates, I'm still in the House of Delegates. I'm in Richmond right now. No, Richmond, Roanoke, there you go. Capital fever. I put in a statute to alert the judges in Virginia. If you think you're going to declare that two guys can marry each other, we're saying to you, this is an impeachable offense under our common laws. Period. Where did I get that? The laws of nature and nature's God, which Jefferson talks about in the Declaration of Independence, which spells out the purpose of government. The Supreme Court in the 1890s refused to admit Utah as a state into the Union unless they outlawed polygamy. Clearly, the Congress can do this. We have the authority to do this. We have done it. There should be no backing away, and it is a disgrace for Eric Holder not to defend this act. The president is supposed to see that the laws be faithfully executed, not faithfully ignored.
Jimmy Radtke.
Yes, I do. I support the Defense of Marriage Act. I believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. I believe that family is the first institute of government, and it's upon which the whole foundation of society is built. I think that what the real assault is the federal government's assault on family. That's where the assault is. And it's not just the definition of marriage where you see the assault on family. It's the assault on everything they do. The federal government literally comes into the four walls of our living room and tells women and husbands what kind of light bulb to put in your house. They tell you how to flush your toilet. They tell parents how to pack, what to feed their kids, what they can and can't feed their kids. You have Orange County, California now that has now said that it is against local ordinance to have a home Bible study in your home. There is an assault on families and culture and the way of life of what has made America great. And we've got to draw that line in the sand and tell the liberals that there is going to be no more. No more. We are not going to put up with the assault on family and freedom and the very thing that made us great.
And our final answer will come from Senator Allen.
Yes, I do support the Defense of Marriage Act for all the reasons that were stated earlier. I do believe that marriage should be between one man and one woman. The reason it's needed is because the acts of different states are given full faith and credit, and this is a way for states to protect the views and values of their state. The family, when you think of the family, you're talking about Supreme Court justices, talking about Congress, talking about presidents, talking about the General Assembly. The family's more important than any of those institutions. The family's the backbone of our society. It's in families where young people learn the importance of honesty and hard work and education and improving oneself. And so I think it's vitally important that we protect families and make sure that families can survive on their own and not being dependent on the government. I talk to so many families, and I know Susan does as well. These high fuel prices, they're affecting families. It's affecting the food at their table. People are paying $30 more every time, at least $30 more, every time they have to fill up with gasoline. That really hurts folks, generally in rural areas and suburbs where folks drive longer distances. This is a big difference for the other side. The other side puts our energy resources off limits. My view is unleash our American energy resources. Tim Kane's for this cap and trade energy tax scheme that EPA is now putting into effect. You know what that's going to do to families? They're going to feel the same pain when they pay their monthly electricity bill that they feel at the gasoline pump. And so let's make sure families can survive economically and raising their children into a much more optimistic future than what we're being burdened with these days.
Folks, we are running a little over, which I want to apologize for. We agreed we get out of here at 4 o'clock. I've got one last question for the candidates, and then we'll get to our closing statements. And I think this might be perhaps even a one-word answer to this question. We'll see. Reporters and politicians generally don't speak all that quickly, but we'll see. We'll see if we both can. We'll begin with Delegate Marshall to keep the order going.
The answer is no.
That was easy. There's one name that I haven't heard mentioned over the 50 minutes we've been up here, and that is the name of Mitt Romney. As of this week, it does appear that he will be the Republican nominee for president. Are you prepared today to endorse his candidacy? Delegate Marshall.
I'm prepared to endorse the winner. We haven't selected that person yet, but I do think that Americans should be more concerned about what Barack Obama does with our money than what Mitt Romney does with his money.
Jamie Radtke.
I would actually like to echo exactly what Delegate Bob Marshall says. We don't have a nominee yet, but according to what we believe, we support the nominee. But I do believe that this election has got to be about spending and the debt. We've got to deal with spending. You've heard a lot about a comeback today. We need a comeback from a $16 trillion debt. That's what we need to come back from. We've got to get our spending out of control if we want to have a prosperous nation once again.
Senator Allen.
Look, this election and the nomination, looks like Mitt Romney's going to be the nominee. I'll do formal endorsements on my own time. I know the media likes to control things, but I'll decide on my own. I'll look forward to working with our nominee, and it looks like I'm sure it'll be Mitt Romney. And it's going to be a stark difference between Tim Kaine and President Trump versus hopefully myself with your help and Mitt Romney. Look at the differences of what's happened with our economy. Look at the debt. Look at these counterproductive energy policies. Mitt Romney, if I'm hired on to represent you all in the United States Senate, there's certain bills I'm going to introduce on day one. One will be a balanced budget amendment and line item veto the Constitution. Second is going to be one to withhold members' pay if they don't get appropriations bills done on time. Third bill, and I think Congress ought to live under the laws they pass. If Obamacare is going to be imposed on us, it ought to apply to Congress as well. And the other is to allow us in Virginia to produce oil and natural gas off our coast and use those royalties for roads and transportation. A President Romney would be an endorser and supporter of that, not a president like Tim Kaine's friend and President Obama, who keeps saying no to Virginia and wants to ban coal and says no to the Keystone Pipeline. I want a president who's going to be on the side of people who pay taxes, work for a living, and care about their families. And indeed, anybody who drives a car ought to be for us. Thank you.
And the final answer to our final question will come from Mr. Jackson.
Well, I'm going to be very honest. Mitt Romney was not my first choice. If I had to make a choice, he was not my first choice. But, given who we face as the opposition to Mitt Romney, let me tell you that when Mitt Romney finally secures the nomination. He says, E.W. Jackson, are you with me? I will stand up and salute like a faithful Marine and say, reporting for duty, sir. And do so happily, because we cannot stand another 4 years of this presidency. Our country can't stand it. Imagine 2 or 3 more Supreme Court justices like Ginsburg, who doesn't even like our Constitution. She likes the South African Constitution. And I'm saying, well, if she likes it so much, go to South Africa and be a justice there. Folks, we are in a grave situation, and we've got to unify. We cannot afford to splinter. Once these issues are decided, we have got to be wholeheartedly behind the nominee. And by the way, the same thing is true for us on this stage. No independence. We've got to make sure that we defeat Tim Kaine and make sure that we defeat Barack Obama and send him packing back to Chicago or wherever he chooses to go.
Candidates, thank you for answering those questions. To our panel, thank you for your questions and for being here. Several drove all the way from the Norfolk area, so we appreciate you making the trip here. Let's conclude now with our closing statements, and we'll begin at the very end with Ms. Radtke. 2 minutes.
Well, I want to thank my family, my husband and Abigail, Sarah, Luke, and my mother and Gil, because this has been a long campaign. And I would say if we do not deal with spending, nothing else matters. Now, I grew up in a military family. My dad flew F-4s, and we lived in West Germany during the Cold War. And one of the things you learn in a military family, and especially with my dad, is discipline. When you say you're going to do something, you do it. And I have carried this discipline with me throughout my life. My husband and I are raising our 3 children, and we are raising them based on our strong faith. We're teaching them American values, and we're dealing with all that modern life has to throw at us. It seems to me that the United States Senate could use some of this discipline because they say a lot and they don't deliver. They say that deficits need to shrink, and yet they keep growing. We watch as they ignore their oath to defend the United States Constitution. And we're waiting on their promises that they've had, whether it's a balanced budget amendment, line item veto, or whatever it is, and we're still waiting. And we can do better, much better. We must do better. I promise you that I will run a disciplined campaign and beat Tim Kaine in November. I will eliminate deficits with my 2 cents proposal. And I will honor my oath to defend the United States Constitution. Seems to me we need a candidate who means what she says and has the discipline to deliver. So let's send a message to the political establishment. I am honored to stand here today and to ask for your support to be Virginia's next United States Senator. Thank you.
And now Delegate Bob Marshall.
I have never been to the left of George Allen, but I guess there's a first time for everything. Like Ronald Reagan, I am 100% pro-life and think we have to pursue both economic and social issues. I introduced a human life statute this year as he applauded Henry Hyde back in the 1980s. My 21 years experience in Richmond shows you can expect that I will do the same thing in Washington as I've done in Richmond. So buy your stock in Excedrin headaches pills, because I'm going to give them to those people in Washington. Jefferson talked about all men being created equal, not born equal for a reason. He talked about inalienable rights coming from God, not from man, and that the purpose of government is to protect those rights. Debt will indenture our children to China. It will cripple our economy. It will rob our savings. I am a consistent person who has opposed debt increases. I opposed Tim Kaine when he supported stimulus money. Nobody else here can say that. I oppose shifting the retirees' funds of Virginia employees to general government expenditures. And I do take one issue with my friend here. 2% cut every year, I don't think sufficiently addresses a 31% deficit, which is what we have this year. You've got to literally go back and cut $1.3 trillion out of this budget. I will put votes on the board. You can see who is serious about doing this. Undeclared perpetual war is destroying our republic, eroding our liberties, and wrecking our economy. I went to court to sue over global warming because I am going after the assumptions of our opponents. If you can show that this was fraudulent, you can get rid of cap and trade. You don't have to worry about this wrecking our economy. I took an oath to defend the Constitution. I have kept that oath. I have opposed my own Republican leadership. When they wanted me to vote for secret votes in subcommittee, I voted for you first. I'm running to serve you, the people, not me, Bob Marshall. My oath is to defend the Constitution, not to get reelected. I ask you for your vote June 12th.
And now Pastor E.W. Jackson.
What a country. What a country. From a foster kid failing in 5th grade to standing before you as a candidate for United States Senate. My father died in June of 2002. I wish he could be here to see this. But he believed in America. And when you go into the voting booth on June 12th, you've got a very sacred decision to make. We all say that we're the best one to go up against Tim Kaine. You have to make that decision. You have to decide who has the ability to articulate our conservative message, not just to us, we're convinced, but to all the people who are yet unconvinced. Young man I bet named Cody who said, I'm just coming to try to figure out what the issues are. To the people who have been told we're against them, we're bigots, we're haters, and yet they share all of our values and they celebrate them every Sunday morning. Who, like Ronald Reagan, when the political insiders and experts say, don't call it an evil empire, don't say bring down this wall, will stand up and say, liberalism is a wall that has been built for the last generation in this country, and it is an evil empire that must be brought down. Who is prepared to say that? This is not a battle of left against right, this is a battle of good against evil. And we have ultimately got to fight for the freedom of our country because that is what's made this nation great. Now all of us have got to come together. We've got to unify. We've got to make up our minds that we're going to fulfill the vision no matter what they say of one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And that working together, this nation shall have a new birth of freedom. That government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. I ask for your prayers first and foremost. I ask for your vote. And I ask for you to be an ambassador to a movement that is going to take Virginia back to the place where it leads the nation back to freedom.
And our final closing statement of this debate comes from Senator George Allen.
Thank you. We've had a good debate sharing ideas this afternoon. I'm optimistic about America's future. The reason I'm optimistic is because of freedom. Not only is freedom the most powerful, successful idea in human history, freedom is a God-given birthright of each and every one of us. Our nation was founded on freedom. But these days, Americans' freedom and opportunities are being limited. They're being harmed. They're being at risk. And why? Because of the overspending, over-regulating, high-tax, big government policies of President Obama, Tim Kaine, and the Washington liberals. Now, this election is about setting the course for America's comeback. It'll be propelled by the invigorating breeze of freedom. We've talked about it, trusting free people to actually take control of their own lives and their own families, unleashing our free enterprise system with simple, fairer, more competitive taxes and regulatory policies so that entrepreneurs can start and grow a business without the heavy hand of government stifling them. This election is about the freedom to use the blessings of our plentiful American energy resources rather than having the regulators take them off limits. This is an election about the freedom of us to choose our own doctors and to determine our best quality care rather than have empowered government bureaucrats rationing care. This is about protection of workers' freedom, the right to work without having to pay union dues as a condition of having a job. And it's about protecting our individual freedoms that are enshrined in the Constitution, from freedom of expression and religion, right of self-defense, and the rights and prerogatives of the states and others. My friends, if you want to see a rebirth, a renaissance of freedom and opportunity, I respectfully ask for your vote and your help on June 12th and in November, because my friends, we all need to keep smiling. You know why? We're helping our fellow Americans catch their dreams. And as always, as Virginians, stand strong and positive for freedom. Thank you all so very much.
Let me say thank you to the candidates. You know, I think we are very lucky that here in this Commonwealth we have 4 dedicated public servants who are willing to stand up here, put their neck out on the line, go out to the voters and sell what they've got to say, and also keep it to 90 seconds or 2 minutes. Impressive in all cases. Let's give them another round of applause.